up guys, it's Kristen here today with my April wrap-up. So I actually read a total of 12 books in the month of April, which is like my all-time record, but of course it happened because we had Genrethon this month, and so I read 6 out of the 12 books in that 1 week. And during Genrethon I read A Whole Life by Robert Seataller, The Crucible by Arthur Miller, The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland, the first book in the Fairyland series by Kathleen Ann, Saga Volume 1 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, 7 Brief Lessons on Physics by Carlo Rovelli, and Night by Elie Wiesel, and I already did a whole wrap-up, so if you want to hear my thoughts on all of those books, I will leave the link below. So now for the other books that I read during the month of April, the first one was The Butcher's Hook by Janet Ellis. I know this one probably is going to get the award for the most beautiful cover on my shelf, and I was sent this for review by House of Anansi, and it is a historical fiction novel set in London in the summer of 1763. So the story centers around the main character, Anne Jacobs. She is 19 years old, and her father has just set her up for an arranged marriage with a man that she has absolutely no interest in. She lives a very unhappy life until one day she meets the butcher's boy, a very young, handsome man. She is immediately attracted to him. He likes her as well, but of course because of his social standing, they can't really be together. And I know from that synopsis you're probably thinking this sounds like a very typical historical fiction romance story, but believe me when I say it is not. I have never read a historical fiction book like this. It took a turn that I did not see coming. Janet Ellis's writing is absolutely gorgeous. She gives such a gritty, hyper-realistic portrayal of what London was like at the time. She brings the city to life, but not in a nostalgic way, in a thank God I live in 2016 kind of way. And I freaking love Anne Jacobs. She is unlike any other heroine I've ever read. She's very dark, she's kind of miserable, she is morally ambiguous, to put it lightly. Because she has lived such a sheltered life, she is completely socially inept, and I don't mean that in like a cute, quirky way, more in a cringeworthy, she's just genuinely a weird person kind of way, which I love to see. And I don't know why I didn't guess from the title, but this is actually a very bloody, gruesome book, which I don't mind, but if you're a little bit squeamish, maybe be wary of that. So I just absolutely love the book, and I would really recommend this one, especially for people who are a little bit weary of the genre, because this is historical fiction done right. And I did a full review of this one, so you can click the link below. Next up, I read The Vegetarian by Kang, and it was translated by Deborah Smith. This is another one that I was sent for review from Crown Publishing, and I really didn't think that there was going to be a book that could knock Burial Rights out of the top spot for my books of 2016, but The Vegetarian is a serious contender. I also did a full review of this book, so I won't go into too much detail here, but essentially the story is about a woman named Young Hai who decides one day that she wants to become a vegetarian. This is a very controversial decision in a country like South Korea, and the story is mostly told from the point of view of her different family members, so you only get these brief glimpses into Young Hai's thought process. Other than Salinger's works, I don't think I have ever read a book that could say so much with so few words, because honestly, I could have done an hour-long discussion about this book, and it is only 188 pages. It is very much open to interpretation. Every time I read or watch a new review of it, I learn something new about the book or see it from a different angle. And I buddy read this with Kathleen Ann and Hilary from Yrrobotfriend. I will link their amazing channels below. They are absolutely brilliant. They gave me so many insights into the book and pointed out things that I would have never noticed otherwise, which is why in my full review I recommended that if you do read The Vegetarian, do a buddy read for it. The book brings up a lot of ideas about feminism and how women are controlled in our patriarchal society, but also then how anybody, whether male or female, can feel very repressed, and the story shows what can happen when you just reject societal norms and restraints. There's also a large discussion on the topic of mental illness and how we perceive people with these issues and then go about treating them. And I know The Vegetarian can be very polarizing. There are many scenes that are very strange and bizarre and don't really seem to make any sense. things. But for me, reading it, I did not take anything in this book at face value. I think that everything was meant to be a symbol pointing to these larger, more complex, deeper themes. And that is why I absolutely loved The Vegetarian, because it is a book that is meant to be discussed. And I will probably have to read this 2 or 3 more times before I can fully understand it, which is why I think it is just brilliant. And because I've been reading a lot of these very deep, heavy, complex books, I really just needed something light, fast-paced, and fun, so I picked up Cinder, the first book in the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. I'm sure pretty much everybody knows about this series. They are fairy tale retellings. Obviously, the first book, Cinder, after Cinderella. It is set in this futuristic dystopian world where Cinder is a cyborg and there is a race of people who live on the moon called the Lunars, who are threatening Earth. And I am very sorry to say, because I know so many people love this series, but it was not for me. I did not get on well with Marissa Meyer's writing style. I feel it was overly descriptive and a lot of the characters felt very flat to me. I did not feel any kind of emotional connection to anybody. But the thing about it that irked me the most, and is one of my biggest pet peeves, is when in books there is a mystery set up, but then the author proceeds to spell it out for the reader and they don't let you figure it out on your own. In the book, Cinder has no memory of her childhood or who her family was or where she came from. So I was very intrigued by this and excited that throughout the novel I could put together all the pieces of evidence and try to figure it out for myself. But then, like I said, another character basically spells it out only a quarter of the way through, so when there was that big reveal at the end, I was really confused because as a reader I have known this almost the entire book. So was I supposed to just feel what Cinder would be feeling in that moment of surprise? And again, I know a lot of people love this series, so please do not hate me, it just was not the book for me. And next up, I read The Gracekeepers by Kirsty Logan. This is another one that I was sent for a review by Crown Publishing, and I did a full review of it. As usual, I will link it down below. And this book has been described as the Night Circus meets Station 11, and I have read both of those books, and that is definitely a great way to describe it because it is a circus set in a dystopian world where most of the earth has been covered in water and there is just little pockets and islands of land left, and the world has become divided between the privileged few who still live on land, called the landlockers, and those who live their entire lives out at sea, called the damplings. And I thought this novel was just hauntingly beautiful. I love Kirsty Logan's writing, and the world building in this book is just amazing. You can picture every little detail of it. So as I mentioned in my review, I would say that similar to The Night Circus and Station 11, it's not incredibly plot driven. It is a very quiet, slow-paced novel, which is something that I happen to love, but I can see why maybe it wouldn't be for everybody. But The Night Circus is one of my favorite books of all time, and this definitely helped fill that void that I feel like has been there ever since I read it a few years ago. And next, I am continuing on with the series of unfortunate events, and this month I read The Miserable Mill, the 4th book in the series. And you know, basically the exact same thing happens in all of these books. The 3 Baudelaire orphans are sent to live with a new guardian. Lots of bad things happen to them, and as usual, Count Olaf is in disguise, waiting to steal their money away. I just never seem to get sick of it, and it's such a comfy, cozy read, and I would still say that the 3rd book is my favorite so far. And last but not least, I finally finished Lawrence in Arabia by Scott Anderson. This might be the most difficult book I have ever read. It is a nonfiction book all about the Middle East during World War I, and in particular the role of T.E. Lawrence, a British officer who came to play a major part in the future of the Middle East. First off, I am always interested in nonfiction books that cover topics that are lesser known or that I don't know very much about, and I definitely feel, first off, that people don't talk about World War I nearly as much as World War II, but they especially don't think of what was happening in the Middle East at the time. And I want to do a full in-depth review of this book because it is incredibly complex. And essentially, at that time, there was a proxy war going on between the Allied powers of the UK, France, and Russia, and the Central powers of Germany and the Ottoman Empire. And the British and French powers were trying to stir up an Arab revolt against the ruling Ottoman Empire so that in turn it would weaken Germany and the Central Powers. And in this they would give military support so that the Arabs could gain their independence, and they made agreements that certain territories would be given to them at the end of the war. But at the exact same time, Britain and France made secret agreements between each other that would ignore the agreements that they made, and they planned to take the Middle East countries for themselves. So if you were looking back at the history of the Middle East and wondering how we ended up to the point we are today, you have to go back literally 100 years to 1916 when these agreements were made. That has led to all of the current day problems. And Lawrence himself was a very interesting and controversial figure because he was genuinely working with the Arabs and believed that they should have independence. He did not agree with a lot of the things that his country was doing, and he was actually awarded knighthood by the King of England himself, and he was the first person in history to reject it. Then a lot of people call him a traitor to his country, and he did do a lot of horrific acts during the war that were not necessary, that came out of vengeance. This is such a vital and important part of history that I feel like gets ignored. I wish so badly that I could recommend this book and tell everybody to read it, but it is so incredibly dense. I feel like Scott Anderson could have written it to be much more accessible. I am fascinated by this topic, but there were still points when it was dry as toast. Again, I hope to do a full in-depth review of this book and also compare it to the 1960s movie to see how accurate it was, and then maybe I can give you just the most important points of it and not all of the needless detail, in my opinion. So that is it for all of the books that I read in the month of April. This has definitely been my best reading month ever, not only in terms of number, of course, but I also very much enjoyed or loved almost every book that I read. As usual, I would love to hear your thoughts on these books in the comments down below, and what was one of your favorite books that you read in the month of April. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!